Another big story making headlines in Washington this morning. President Trump has pardoned several high-profile figures accused in the effort to overturn the 2020 election. Ed Martin, the government's pardon attorney, posting the list on social media. It includes Rudy Giuliani, Trump's former personal attorney, former chief of staff Mark Meadows, and Sidney Powell, a former federal prosecutor. Important to note here, presidential pardons only apply to federal crimes, and none of these Trump allies were charged in federal cases.
Okay, so just when you thought Trump's legal situation couldn't possibly get any worse, just when we've covered Supreme Court rulings stripping his immunity, federal judges walking out of court, the Epstein files about to drop, witnesses collapsing everywhere, and Pam Bondi headed to prison, the absolute nuclear bomb just detonated. Mark Meadows, Trump's former chief of staff, who was literally in the room for every major decision during the final months of Trump's presidency, has handed federal prosecutors a treasure trove of evidence that directly implicates Trump in criminal schemes to overturn the election and orchestrate cover-ups. We're not talking about circumstantial evidence or secondhand accounts here, folks. We're talking about audio recordings of Trump's actual voice-giving criminal instructions. We're talking about detailed memos that Meadows personally wrote documenting Trump's corrupt intent. We're talking about insider testimony from someone who was present for private White House meetings where Trump admitted his fraud claims weren't true, but ordered his team to pursue them anyway. This is the kind of evidence that prosecutors dream about. Irrefutable proof of criminal conduct directly from Trump's own inner circle that completely contradicts every defense Trump has been trying to make. Legal experts are calling this the most damning evidence yet in all of Trump's criminal proceedings, and they're saying it makes conviction not just likely, but virtually certain. Trump's legal team has been thrown into absolute crisis mode with emergency filings, contradictory public statements, and desperate searches for any possible way to minimize the catastrophic damage that Meadows just inflicted. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us. Be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
We are now 354 days away from the midterms. The government is officially open, and the House picked up right where they left off with the Epstein files. A vote is expected next week on a measure forcing the Department of Justice to release them. And several Republicans are considering defying Trump and voting in favor of making the documents public.
Now let's talk about who Mark Meadows is and why his cooperation with prosecutors represents such a complete betrayal and such devastating evidence for Trump's defense. Meadows wasn't some peripheral advisor or low-level staffer. He was Trump's chief of staff, literally the person in charge of managing the White House operation and coordinating between Trump and his various advisors and cabinet members. Meadows was in the Oval Office for the most sensitive conversations. He participated in strategy meetings about how to respond to the election results. He was on phone calls when Trump was pressuring state officials to find votes or change outcomes. He took notes during meetings where Trump's legal team told him the fraud claims were baseless, but Trump ordered them to proceed anyway. Meadows has firsthand knowledge of everything that happened during the critical period when Trump was trying to overturn the election. And now he's apparently decided to give all of that knowledge to federal prosecutors in the form of recordings, memos, and sworn testimony. The betrayal is absolute and complete. Meadows was one of Trump's most loyal and trusted advisors, someone Trump believed would never turn on him. And yet here we are with Meadows handing over evidence that's going to send Trump to prison. The shock and panic within Trump's remaining inner circle has to be overwhelming because if Meadows can flip, anyone can flip. Here's what makes Meadows' evidence so uniquely powerful and impossible for Trump to defend against. It's not just Meadows' word against Trump's, it's actual recordings and documents that prove Trump's criminal intent beyond any reasonable doubt. According to reports, the audio recordings that Meadows provided include Trump's actual voice saying things like, "I don't care if the claims aren't true, just get it done." Think about how devastating that is from a legal perspective. Trump has been claiming in court filings and public statements that he genuinely believed the election was stolen and that everything he did was based on legitimate concerns about fraud. But here's a recording of Trump admitting the claims aren't true and ordering his team to pursue them anyway. That completely destroys any good faith defense Trump might try to make. It proves criminal intent, that Trump knew what he was doing was based on lies but did it anyway because he wanted to stay in power. Prosecutors can play that recording for a jury, and Trump's guilt becomes undeniable. There's no way to spin or explain away your own voice admitting you're pursuing strategies based on claims you know are false. The memos that Meadows kept provide corroboration and additional context showing the full scope of Trump's criminal schemes. And Meadows' firsthand testimony can walk jurors through exactly what happened in each meeting and conversation, explaining the context and making clear that Trump was directing everything. The specific criminal schemes that Meadows' evidence reveals are extensive and include some of the most serious charges Trump faces. The fake electors plot, where Trump's team organized slates of fraudulent electors in states Biden won, is documented in Meadows' records, showing Trump personally directing the effort. The pressure campaign on state officials to change election results is captured in recordings and memos showing Trump knew his demands were improper and illegal. The attempts to convince Mike Pence to reject legitimate electoral votes are detailed in Meadows' testimony about meetings where lawyers told Trump the plan was unconstitutional, but Trump ordered them to keep pushing it. The obstruction of justice related to January 6th is documented through Meadows' accounts of what Trump knew about the violence and when he knew it, and what he chose to do or not do in response. Each of these schemes on its own would be a serious felony. Together, they constitute a massive criminal conspiracy to overturn a presidential election through fraud, intimidation, and violence. And Meadows has evidence proving Trump's direct involvement in all of it. The prosecutors building these cases now have everything they need to prove beyond reasonable doubt that Trump committed these crimes with full knowledge that what he was doing was illegal. Let's break down exactly what motivated Mark Meadows to cooperate with prosecutors and hand over this devastating evidence, because understanding his decision-making helps explain why Trump's entire inner circle is now potentially vulnerable to flipping. Meadows was clearly facing serious criminal exposure himself for his role in Trump's election overturn schemes. He participated in the fake electors plot. He was on calls when Trump pressured state officials. He helped coordinate aspects of the January 6th events. Federal prosecutors likely approached Meadows with overwhelming evidence of his own criminal conduct and gave him a choice: cooperate and potentially avoid prison, or stay loyal to Trump and face decades behind bars. When you're looking at that choice, when you have prosecutors showing you the evidence they have against you and explaining how long you'll be in prison if convicted, loyalty starts to seem less important than self-preservation. Meadows apparently made the rational calculation that Trump is going down regardless of what Meadows does, so he might as well save himself by cooperating fully with prosecutors. That cooperation means handing over every piece of evidence he has, testifying truthfully about everything he witnessed, and helping prosecutors understand the full scope of Trump's criminal operation. In exchange, Meadows likely gets a plea deal that results in reduced charges, lighter sentencing, or possibly even immunity if his testimony is valuable enough. The audio recordings that Meadows provided are going to be the centerpiece of any prosecution against Trump because they're essentially impossible to defend against or explain away. When jurors hear Trump's own voice admitting he doesn't care if his fraud claims are true and ordering his team to pursue illegal strategies anyway, that's game over for the defense. You can't claim you believed you were acting properly when you're caught on tape admitting you knew your claims were false. You can't argue you were just following advice from lawyers when recordings show you ignoring lawyers who told you your plans were illegal. You can't claim you didn't have criminal intent when your own words prove you were willing to break laws to achieve your goals. Defense attorneys typically try to create reasonable doubt by suggesting alternative explanations for their client's conduct or by attacking the credibility of prosecution witnesses. But when the evidence is your client's own recorded statements, there's no alternative explanation that makes sense, and there's no witness credibility to attack. The recordings speak for themselves, and they tell a story of deliberate, knowing criminality. Prosecutors are going to play these recordings over and over during trial, and each time jurors hear them, Trump's guilt is going to become more obvious and undeniable. The memos that Meadows kept provide crucial contemporaneous documentation of what happened in meetings and conversations with Trump. Contemporaneous notes and memos are incredibly powerful evidence in criminal cases because they were created at the time events happened rather than being reconstructed from memory years later. When Meadows wrote a memo right after a meeting saying, "Trump admitted fraud claims are false but ordered us to keep pushing them," that memo is going to carry enormous weight with jurors because there's no question about whether Meadows' memory is accurate. He documented it in real time. The memos also provide context and detail that help prosecutors build complete narratives about criminal schemes. Instead of just having isolated pieces of evidence, prosecutors can use Meadows' memos to show the progression of Trump's criminal plans. When decisions were made, what alternatives were considered, what legal advice was received and rejected, how Trump responded to setbacks or resistance. This kind of comprehensive documentation allows prosecutors to prove not just that crimes occurred, but that they were part of deliberate, sustained criminal conspiracies that Trump personally directed. The memos also contradict Trump's own sworn statements in various proceedings, which means prosecutors can potentially add perjury charges on top of everything else. Let's talk about how Meadows' cooperation sets a precedent for other Trump insiders who are now watching and making their own calculations about whether to cooperate with prosecutors. Every person who was in Trump's inner circle and participated in his criminal schemes is now seeing that even the chief of staff decided cooperating was the smart move. They're seeing that Meadows got a deal that's going to keep him out of prison or significantly reduce his sentence. They're realizing that prosecutors have overwhelming evidence and that loyalty to Trump isn't going to protect them from conviction. This is going to create a cascade effect where more and more Trump associates decide to flip and provide evidence against Trump in exchange for their own deals. We've already seen witnesses collapsing on the stand and admitting to crimes. We've seen Pam Bondi facing prison for obstruction. Now we're seeing Trump's chief of staff betray him completely. Every Trump loyalist who's been holding out and refusing to cooperate is going to look at this situation and wonder if they're making a huge mistake by not taking deals while they're still available. The race to cooperate is going to accelerate dramatically, and each new cooperating witness is going to provide additional evidence that makes Trump's conviction even more certain, while also incriminating other Trump associates who haven't flipped yet. The contradiction between Meadows' evidence and Trump's prior sworn statements is going to be central to proving that Trump committed perjury in addition to his other crimes. Trump has testified in depositions and has made statements in court filings under oath claiming he believed the election was stolen and that he acted in good faith based on that belief. But now prosecutors have recordings of Trump admitting his claims weren't true. They have memos documenting that Trump knew his legal theories were rejected by courts and advisors but pursued them anyway. They have firsthand testimony from Meadows explaining that Trump was told repeatedly his fraud narrative was false but kept pushing it because he wanted to stay in power. All of that evidence proves Trump's sworn statements were lies. Perjury charges are relatively straightforward to prove when you have this kind of contradictory evidence. Prosecutors just need to show that the defendant made statements under oath, that those statements were false, and that the defendant knew they were false when making them. Trump's recordings and Meadows' memos check all three boxes definitively. The addition of perjury charges to Trump's already extensive criminal exposure increases his potential sentence and provides prosecutors with additional leverage in any plea negotiations. The political fallout from Meadows' betrayal and evidence dump is going to be massive and is going to accelerate Trump's complete isolation from the Republican Party and his remaining supporters. We've already documented how the GOP has fractured and how major figures have abandoned Trump. Now, one of Trump's most trusted and loyal advisors has turned on him and provided evidence that proves Trump committed serious crimes. That's going to make it essentially impossible for any Republican to continue defending Trump without looking like they're defending known criminal conduct. When you have Trump's own chief of staff saying under oath that Trump knew his fraud claims were false but pursued them anyway, there's no credible argument left that Trump was just mistaken or that he genuinely believed the election was stolen. The evidence of deliberate criminality is now undeniable, and Republicans who continue to stand by Trump are going to be seen as complicit in his crimes rather than just politically loyal. The media coverage of Meadows' cooperation is going to be relentless, with daily revelations about new evidence and new details of Trump's criminal schemes. Every news cycle is going to feature more damaging information from the Meadows evidence cache, and the cumulative impact is going to destroy whatever microscopic amount of public support Trump has left. So where does Meadows' evidence leave Trump in terms of his ability to mount any kind of defense at trial? The brutal answer is that Trump's defense is essentially non-existent now because Meadows' recordings, memos, and testimony have eliminated every possible argument Trump's lawyers might make. You can't claim you didn't commit the crimes when your own chief of staff is testifying that you did and has recordings proving it. You can't argue you lacked criminal intent when there are recordings of you admitting you knew your claims were false. You can't say you were following legal advice when memos document you ignoring lawyers who told you your plans were illegal. You can't attack witness credibility when the key witness is someone you personally chose to be your chief of staff and who documented everything contemporaneously. Trump's legal team is in an impossible position where they have to somehow defend against evidence that's ironclad and irrefutable, The emergency filings and contradictory public statements that Trump's lawyers are making show just how panicked they are and how completely they lack any viable strategy. Their only real option at this point is to try negotiating a plea deal that might cap Trump's prison time at something less than life in prison. But even that's going to be difficult because prosecutors have such overwhelming evidence that they have very little incentive to offer favorable terms. The near impossibility of acquittal that legal experts are predicting based on Meadows' evidence is supported by both the strength of the evidence and by how juries typically respond to insider testimony backed by recordings and documents. Jurors understand that when someone from the defendant's inner circle decides to testify against them, that person is taking huge personal risks and facing enormous social and professional consequences. That gives insider testimony tremendous credibility because jurors recognize the witness has little incentive to lie when doing so would destroy their own life. When that insider testimony is backed up by audio recordings and contemporaneous written documentation, the credibility becomes essentially unimpeachable. Defense attorneys might try to attack Meadows' motivations for cooperating. They'll say he's just trying to save himself and that he's lying to get a deal. But that argument falls flat when prosecutors can play recordings that prove what Meadows is saying is true. The jury is going to hear Trump's own voice admitting criminal conduct. And at that point, it doesn't matter what Meadows' motivations are because the recordings speak for themselves. Legal experts who've analyzed this type of evidence in other high-profile cases say that defendants facing this kind of proof almost never win at trial because there's simply no credible defense available. Let's talk about what happens during the trial when prosecutors present Meadows' evidence to the jury, because the dramatic impact of that presentation is going to be overwhelming and potentially historic. Imagine the courtroom scene. Prosecutors call Mark Meadows to the stand, and Trump's former chief of staff walks up and is sworn in. The prosecutors walk Meadows through his background, establishing his credentials and his close relationship with Trump. Then they start asking about specific meetings and conversations, and Meadows provides detailed testimony about Trump's criminal schemes. The prosecutors then introduce audio recordings, and the jury hears Trump's actual voice giving criminal instructions and admitting his fraud claims are false. They show memos that Meadows wrote documenting Trump's corrupt intent. They walk through call logs and schedules proving Trump was personally directing every aspect of the criminal conspiracies. Hour after hour, the evidence mounts until the picture is complete and undeniable. Trump committed serious crimes with full knowledge that what he was doing was illegal, and he did it because he valued staying in power more than he valued following the law. The cross-examination by Trump's defense attorneys is going to be brief and ineffective because there's nothing to impeach. Meadows' testimony is backed by recordings and documents that Trump can't dispute. The jury is going to leave that trial with zero doubt about Trump's guilt. The precedent that Meadows' cooperation establishes for holding presidents accountable through insider testimony is historically significant and is going to reshape how future presidential misconduct gets investigated and prosecuted. In the past, presidents could often rely on loyalty from their inner circle to keep criminal conduct hidden or to make prosecution difficult through lack of direct evidence. But Meadows' decision to cooperate fully demonstrates that even the closest advisors will flip when faced with serious criminal charges of their own. This is going to make future presidents much more cautious about involving their staff in illegal activities because they'll know that those staff members might eventually testify against them. It's also going to make it easier for prosecutors to build cases against powerful politicians because they'll have the Meadows example to point to when trying to convince other insiders to cooperate. The message is clear. If you participate in your boss's crimes, you're going to face consequences. And your best chance to minimize those consequences is to cooperate early and fully with investigators. This precedent strengthens accountability mechanisms and makes it harder for presidents to abuse power while hiding behind claims of executive privilege or loyalty from subordinates. The reshaping of the 2026 campaign and legal landscape that's resulting from Meadows' evidence is already underway and is going to accelerate as more details become public. Any politician who's been associated with Trump is now facing questions about what they knew and when they knew it about the criminal schemes that Meadows has documented. Republican candidates are going to be forced to take clear positions on whether they condemn Trump's conduct or continue to defend him, and either choice carries significant political risks. The evidence Meadows provided is going to dominate news cycles for months as prosecutors use it in multiple cases and as defense attorneys try unsuccessfully to challenge it. Each new revelation from the Meadows evidence cache is going to generate its own cycle of analysis and commentary. The broader political conversation is going to shift from whether Trump should face accountability to what accountability looks like and how to prevent future presidents from engaging in similar criminal conduct. Democratic candidates are going to run on platforms emphasizing rule of law and accountability for powerful officials. The entire political landscape is being reshaped by the evidence of Trump's criminality that Meadows has provided. Here's the bottom line as we conclude analysis of what might be the single most devastating blow to Trump's defense in his entire legal saga. Mark Meadows has provided federal prosecutors with irrefutable evidence, including audio recordings, detailed memos, and insider testimony that directly proves Trump's criminal conduct in attempting to overturn the election. The recordings captured Trump admitting his fraud claims were false, but ordering his team to pursue them anyway, which destroys any good faith defense. The memos provide contemporaneous documentation of Trump's corrupt intent and contradict his sworn statements in other proceedings. Meadows' firsthand testimony can walk juries through exactly what happened in private meetings where Trump directed criminal schemes. This evidence makes conviction virtually certain because it's impossible to defend against your own recorded admissions of criminal conduct. Trump's legal team is in complete crisis mode with no viable defense strategy remaining. The cooperation sets a precedent that's going to encourage other Trump insiders to flip and provide additional evidence. The political fallout is accelerating Trump's total isolation as Republicans abandon him rather than defend proven criminal conduct. The trial presentation of this evidence is going to be devastating and historic, with Trump's own voice sealing his fate. The precedent for presidential accountability through insider testimony is going to reshape how future misconduct gets investigated. The 2026 political landscape is being transformed as the evidence dominates headlines and forces every politician to take positions on Trump's proven crimes. Trump faces near certain conviction on multiple serious charges that will result in substantial prison time. His only remaining option is negotiating plea deals that might limit total sentencing, but will still require admission of guilt and imprisonment. The betrayal by his own chief of staff represents the complete collapse of Trump's inner circle and the end of any loyalty that might have protected him from the full consequences of his criminal conduct. Keep watching this story because the impact of Meadows' evidence is going to reverberate through every aspect of Trump's remaining legal proceedings and is going to provide prosecutors with the ammunition they need to secure convictions that will send Trump to prison for potentially the rest of his life.